Very good to have you today, and I appreciate your presence, even though it's fall break coming up. Not much of a break, but a long weekend anyway, so you get that. Big week for me. My daughter gets married Friday night, so my mind is frazzled a little bit, mainly because my daughter and my wife are frazzled. I'm fine, I think, but they're frazzled. Except we keep getting a bill for something, and that's frazzling me more. So we're looking forward to that. I'm ready for it. I don't mean this in a bad way. I'm ready for it to be over so we can move on and not have to worry about other things, and not have to worry about that. We can deal with other things. But it's coming, and we're excited about it. We have to put our dog in a kennel for 5 days, and I hate that. He does not like kennels, and we could pick him up Saturday, but we don't get back in time. They close before we get back, so I'm always sad that he's there Sunday and Monday and we can't get him, or I'll go get him Monday morning. And so he's a funny little dog. He's older. He's 7, and he'll bark at me the whole way from the kennel to home, just to let me have it for leaving him there. So I know that stuff you all don't want to know, but stuff I like to share anyway. Well, we are in the book of Galatians. Everyone has taken the test. Everyone should be able to see your grade on the test. Your paper is due Friday. I can't remember, 10 or midnight, just 10. We have to turn in midterm grades next week, so I'll have your papers graded. And I don't know Moodle enough from the students' side to know, are you able to see your grade as you move along? Yeah. So what you see will be your midterm grade. If for some reason I don't get your second paper graded by the time I have to turn those in, don't worry about that. We'll get everything. But you're halfway through. You've got 2 papers behind. Well, we'll have 2 papers behind you and 2 exams behind you. So you're halfway there. And we come to the letter of Galatians, and we'll stop and pause and pray for a moment. And let's remember each other as we go on fall break, if you're going anywhere, or if you're staying at home. Certainly take time to rest, take time for yourself. You need that, and that's what this is for. It's also for you to catch up on things if you need to, but be sure you take the time to rest. I think that's extremely important in our lives. So let's pray together, and we'll get started. Father, we thank you for today. We are grateful for the opportunity for a long weekend. We ask that your grace and peace would be with us as we share together, and that we would learn, and as the Bible speaks to our current times, and we ask it in Christ's name. Amen. Well, in the textbook, we switch order from the New Testament. We did Acts. Up next in the New Testament is Romans, but up next in the text, in the Scripture is Romans, but up next in the text is Paul's letter to the Galatians. And they do it that way, I think, in large part because they feel like Paul's letter to the Galatians is written before his letter to the Rome, and then also forms some of the basis for the theology of what he writes in Rome. We'll touch on not everything in Galatians. It's a short book, 6 chapters, I think, and you can read it. When you read it as a letter. If you could find this, and maybe you can do this on the internet, if you could find the book of Galatians without the verse and chapter numbers, then it would read like a letter. And that's really how you want to read it, because it is a letter. Paul's writing a letter. He didn't put chapter 1, verse 1. We did that much later on in the process, but Paul's writing a letter, and so you can imagine that they would gather, and maybe like this, and someone would get up and read the letter, and they would discuss it, and then they would probably do it again at another day, and they would keep doing it until they think they understand the letter, or they write a response to Paul. So there's probably a lot of letters written, and a lot of letters we don't have, but we do have some of these, and that's helpful. When you think of Galatia, don't think of a city. Galatia is not a city like Corinth or Rome or Thessalonica. Galatia is a region in Asia Minor, and it's a pretty large region. We know that Paul traveled there on 2 of his missionary journeys. There's some question about whether he traveled in the northern part or just in the southern part. We think probably just in the southern part. Because it is in Asia Minor, there's the traditional thought that these were all Gentile people, not Jewish people, but Gentiles who, to use the word, were converted to the Christian faith. But the Christian faith is still tightly connected to the Jewish faith. And that's going to be an important thing as Paul goes along. The question, as the Christian church grows, or as the followers of Christ and their numbers grow, is, do we have to follow the Jewish laws since we're not Jewish? And primarily those are related to what you can or cannot eat, who you can or cannot eat with, and circumcision. And so the early church, I'll say it this way, the early church fights and debates and struggles with that issue that encompasses those other issues. Do we have to be Jewish or become Jewish in order to be followers of Christ? Or can we still be Gentiles and not worry about the laws, but follow Christ and still eat the things we want to eat, like pork or stuff, and eat with who we want to? Jewish people were not allowed to eat with sinners, or people who were considered unclean. There were a number of laws that were set up for them to follow. So this is a big debate, and it keeps some people from becoming followers of Christ. They don't want to go through all of that. They don't want to go through following all the Jewish laws, and so it becomes a hindrance. And so when Paul starts traveling, Paul thinks that he's had a conversation with James and Peter back at the headquarters, we'll call it, of the church in Jerusalem. And Peter and James were disciples, apostles. They were eyewitnesses to everything Jesus did. And so, Paul asked the church elders, Peter, James, others, is it okay if we say to the Gentiles, you don't have to be circumcised, you don't have to follow the Jewish laws of purification and eating pork and eating with unclean people? And I wasn't there. We don't have a video of it, and we don't really have the discussion recorded, but it's kind of like Peter and James nodded and said, yeah, I think that may be okay. And so Paul, who has a lot of zeal, who is just so excited to share the gospel, goes on these missionary journeys, and specifically in Galatians says, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Just follow what Christ taught, and that's love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, and worship and be together and take care of each other, and that was good. And so Paul is with the churches in Galatia a while. But then he moves on. And when Paul moves on, he gets letters from the churches in the Galatia, and they're saying, Paul, I think you said we didn't have to do this, but there are now people saying we have to do this. And so what do we do? And so what's happened is James and Peter and some of their friends would go to Galatia to see what's going on. And you have to remember, all of this is new. Creating this Christian movement is new. And they're not really sure the direction it's going, how it's going to get there, or how they're going to order it. And James and Peter go, and at first, and you got to love Peter. Peter is one of those disciples who gets it right, and then can turn around and completely blow it the next time. I mean, he is that type of disciple. But he's considered a very faithful Christian, which is hopeful for us, because if Peter messes up like that, then we're going to mess up like that too, and Jesus is gracious enough to forgive us of that. So Peter goes up to Galatia and to meet some of the followers of Christ. Remember, Galatia is not a city; it's a region, so. They probably meet in some homes and various things, and they're Gentiles, and Peter sits down and eats with them. That's a no-no. You don't do that if you're a Jew. Now, do you see the problem that's going to arise? Some of the early followers of Jesus were people who said, you have to become Jewish and then follow the Christian way. Others said, no, you don't have to do that. Christ fulfilled the Jewish laws, and you don't have to follow the Jewish laws. So Peter's up there, he sits down and he eats with the Gentiles. Well, there are some others there who came with Peter, who traveled with Peter, who are more zealous about following the Jewish laws. And they kind of pull Peter aside and they say, Peter, do you not remember that you're a Jew and Jewish people do not eat with Gentiles? And Peter said, yeah, I remember that, but I think I told Paul it'd be all right. But then this guy's very persuasive and says, you know, I don't think the folks back in Jerusalem are going to care for this very much. And so Peter, who had been eating with the Gentiles in Galatia, all of a sudden quits eating with the Gentiles in Galatia. And so the folks in Galatia are like, okay, what did we do? What's going on here? And Peter says, hey, you know, you really do need to follow the Jewish laws. And they say, this is all Tommy's paraphrase, okay? So don't say this is in the Bible. This is my paraphrase. They say, wait a minute, Paul said we don't have to do this. Peter says, well, yeah, you do have to. Paul, you know, don't listen to Paul. And others would say, well, no, we're going to listen to Paul because he came here and talked to us and he told us the story. And so you begin to have within Galatia two factions. One faction says we don't have to follow the Jewish law to be Christian. The other faction says, you do have to follow the law. You do have to be circumcised. You can't eat meat. You can't eat with Gentiles, etc., etc., etc. And the church begins to struggle within itself, and they begin to argue within themselves. So word gets back to Paul somehow, probably a letter, or maybe somebody went and saw Paul and said, we've got a problem. And when Paul hears what's going on in Galatia, Paul is not very happy. He is, well, let's just say it this way, Paul's pissed off. He's angry because he thought he had an understanding with Peter and James that you didn't have to follow all the Jewish laws. And that's what he told them. And now they're coming in and telling them something else, and it's messing things up. And Paul is not happy, and he's not happy with the church for not being able to think on their own and to reflect upon what they've been taught and how that applies to their lives today. To take what Paul tells them. Of course, they don't have the Bible, but they do have the stories that Paul told them about Jesus. And Paul's pretty upset that they don't take those stories and apply them to this life and see that Jesus fulfilled the law, therefore they don't have to completely follow it. And so it becomes an issue. So Paul couldn't call them up on the phone. He couldn't just text them or anything. He writes them a letter. And it's not a very kind letter. It's a letter rebuke. And he's going to tell the church, you're missing it. You're missing it entirely. And I'm disappointed in you. And I'm angry with Peter and James. And this is not at all what I taught you. So Paul is pretty angry. We know that because of the way Paul writes the letter. And it's not because Paul says, I'm angry. In those days when you wrote a letter, it was a very formal process. You had essentially, if you took letter writing, and when I was in school, you had to take letter writing in business classes, but who you address it to, what's the salutation, and what's the opening, and what's the greeting, and all of that. So all of those elements are present in most of Paul's letters. You don't find them here in Paul's letter to the Galatians. I think this is won't work. Yes, it works. Okay, that's too little for you to see it probably, but this is how he begins, and this wouldn't be entirely different from the way he writes a letter. But when Paul writes a letter of congratulations, or I'm happy for you, it takes on a whole different tone. So he introduces himself. He says, Paul, an apostle. And when he says an apostle, he is giving his credentials. This is who I am. I'm not just anybody. I am an apostle. I was appointed by Jesus. I was called by Jesus to share the story, to go to these places and start these churches. And he even says that then. He says, sent not from men, nor by a man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brothers and sisters with me. So you have a greeting. It's a little terse greeting, a little tense maybe, but he says, Paul, an apostle, and all the brothers and sisters with me. There were those who traveled with Paul. And then in the middle of that is Paul giving his credentials. This is who I am. And this is why I have the authority to say what I'm going to say. The next little bit is what you would call a greeting. It's not your typical greeting, but you would have it in a lot of letters. He says, "Grace and peace to you from God our Father, who gave Himself, etc., etc. To whom be glory and power forever and ever. Amen." Most of Paul's letters will go on longer than that with a, I thank my God all the times I remember you, or I remember how you treated me, how you were so good to me, and it's an affirming and encouraging letter. Paul doesn't have time to be encouraging. And so he begins in verse 6, and this is how you know that he's angry. He says, "I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel." And that different gospel would be the gospel that says you have to follow the Jewish law. The key in this is the term grace. for Paul, when he uses the term grace, he is referencing the grace of Jesus, but the grace of not having to fulfill the law to be in a right relationship with God. So in the Old Testament thought, in the Old Testament Jewish thinking, in order to be in a right relationship with God, you had to do all of these things. You had to follow all of these laws. And if you messed them up, or if you didn't follow them, it's not like you were put in prison, but you were considered not in a good relationship with God. And the whole purpose of the law was to help you to be in a right relationship with God. Well, throughout their history, the Jewish people never really could fulfill the law, and truth is we can't today. And so God sends Jesus, who then fulfills the law and becomes the sacrifice, and that's where grace comes in. And this is Tommy's paraphrase and Tommy's theology, but it is Jesus saying, I accept you as you are. You're going to make mistakes. I love you. Follow me. And that becomes the emphasis. That's a little bit of the picture of grace. What does grace, let me ask you this. I always like to ask my kids in church, how would you, well, let me ask you this. What color would you use to paint grace? What color would you use to paint grace? Well, I wouldn't think you would use red, because red is an angry color. So what color would we use? White? Yeah. Okay. Gold. Or what? Gold? Okay. Blue?
Green, because it's opposite of red, I guess.
Okay. The color that comes to my mind, and there's not a right or wrong answer here. The color that comes to my mind is pink. I don't know why it comes to my mind, but pink is the color of grace for me. Blue can be your color of grace, gold, white, whatever. But I think about pink. Now, if you were, how do I say this? If you were to point to a time in your life when grace was given, what did it feel like, or what did it look like? So let me give you an example. I don't know if this is the best example, but this is what I come up with. When I was younger than you all, we would go to my grandparents, about once a month at least, and one of the things I enjoyed doing was mowing my grandparents' yard, and they lived out in the country on a 75-acre farm or something, and so they had apple trees everywhere, and it's not like a subdivision yard, it's got hills and ditches and things, and so I mowed their yard. Now, my dad and my grandfather always told me, don't get too close to this ditch, because if the grass is wet, you'll slide into it. Well, now, I want to do a good job, and so I get as close as I can, to where it had been mowed before. What happened? My little lawnmower slid into the ditch. I couldn't get it out. I tried every way I could. I tried to push. I tried. So what do I do? Who do you go to when you're in trouble? I went to my mother. She's the safe one. I said, Mom, Daddy and Papa are going to kill me because I got the tractor in the ditch. Come help me push it out. And so she comes, and we get in the ditch. We try to push it out. We can't. I'm thinking, okay, well, my life is over. She goes, my grandfather and dad are down in the barn. She goes to the barn and says to them, in essence, Tommy got the tractor stuck in the ditch. You all go help him get out of the ditch and don't say a word about it. Just do it. and they did. They didn't fuss at me or say anything. That's grace for me when I think about grace. Because I messed up. I did something I wasn't supposed to do. I knew I wasn't supposed to do it and did it anyway. There was another time, and this was when I was younger than that, we used a push mower for our yard at home. We didn't have a riding lawnmower. We pushed it. My brother and I would take turns. It was about an acre. And then after we mowed, we would always spray the lawnmower off underneath. Do y'all understand that? Or to get all the old grass off and keep it clean. Well, my dad was spraying. I was holding the lawnmower down so it would tilt up so he could spray it. Well, while that was happening, my mom and sister came back from shopping. And in my thrill to see, not my sister, but my mother, I let go of the lawnmower and it fell on Dad's hand. And in a minute I saw Dad come around the corner and his hand was all bloody, but he didn't say anything. For me, that's a picture of grace. So when you think about grace, think about those times when you know you've messed up, but someone has stepped up for you to make it right. When I was, one more story then I'll quit. When I was doing my doctoral dissertation, you had 2 or 3 days where you had to answer questions on paper. And these were pretty hefty questions. And you didn't get a book. These were from the classes that you took and from the 3 professors who supervised you. This was the first year, however, that they let you write your answers out on a computer. Computers 30 years ago looked nothing like this, like what we've got. Big, bulky things. And they were new, and we weren't overly familiar with them. My handwriting was never good, so I decided I'd type out all my answers on the computer. So from 8 o'clock in the morning until 12 noon, I typed, constant, answering maybe 3 questions. You answer them that long. And the guy who's watching everything, says, okay, it's 12. If you've done it on your printer, then you need to hit print and print the papers out up here. And they were on those dot matrix printers, you know, and nasty old things. And I went to print my answers, and they weren't there. They weren't there. They were nowhere on the computer. And I go into panic mode, because my life really is going to end at that point. You could take these types of tests twice a year, in August or in January. And so it was August, and I would have to wait a whole semester to take them again. And this was just one professor, and we looked, we couldn't find them anywhere on the computer, and I was literally sick to my stomach. So I immediately go to the professor and say, you know, Wade, well, I didn't call him Wade, I called him Dr. Rowett. I said, I lost all of the work that I did for your questions. What can I do? He said, well, let me think about it. So the next day he said, okay, Chuck, Dr. Bug and I have worked things out. You can answer his questions, and then you can answer my questions again. And that's how they worked it out. That was grace. It saved me a semester, you know, saved my behind, because I'd had to wait so long. Doctoral dissertation or doctoral work at a school like Southern was like 4 years. And you had, when she got home, looked at me and she said, "Are you sick?" I said, "Absolutely." I just don't think I'm going to make it from here. But grace comes in the picture, and things were good. You know, though extended, I always tell my students, I've probably told you all this, grace, there's always grace, and that's true with me. If you know, if you need grace, then I will find a way to extend it. Now, if you've been messing around and not doing anything, grace may be harder to come by. But if you've been working and showing up and you're still having a difficult time, grace is more easy to offer. The grace that Jesus offers, that Paul talks about, is even greater and more meaningful than that. And I don't know about you, I need that grace quite a bit. This is a funny story. I'll tell you this. This is when I really was asking God for some grace. But when we were expecting our first son, we had a friend who, she and her husband were expecting a son or a child as well. Maybe in a month or two after ours was born. And so she worked at the hospital, and so being a pastor, I visited at the hospital a lot, and I saw her, and she worked in outpatient surgery, and she had her scrubs on, and they're very loose fitting, and so I said, you know, "Hey Dee, when are you going to have that baby?" And you know how you say something, and as soon as it goes out, you wish you could draw it back. That happened. And she looked at me, she said, "I had it 2 months ago." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, good, happy for you. That's great." and just, you know, go and crawl under my car now. You know, there's always situations, always instances when we need grace, and Paul is big on grace, and this is what he's pushing: grace over the law. That the law's not where it is any longer. It's where it's grace, and you know, sometimes we're not a very patient people, but we're also not a very graceful people. And what I mean by that is, if we're driving and somebody cuts us off, you know, cuts in front of us, and we have to slow down real quick. I don't know about you, but I have a temptation, a great temptation to say something or to do something that would be somewhat inappropriate. Are you familiar with the movie? Oh gosh, what's National Lampoon Christmas Vacation? Y'all know that one? They're going to get the Christmas tree, and you know the guys in the truck on, you know, back and forth, and they get right side by side each other, and Chevy Chase says, "Look, kids, a deer." You know, that's the temptation you get. You know, so we're not very understanding about other people, and I think part of the challenge is we have to put ourselves in one another's shoes. I know a little bit about you, but I don't know everything about you. I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't know what may interrupt your studies, or what may make it difficult for you to do a test, or to show up for class, or anything. So part of grace says, look at life through that person's eyes, and see life through that person's eyes. I think when we do that, we can offer grace better. You all know some about me, but you don't know everything about me. You know, I'm married and have 2 kids. What you don't know is that this time of the year is always a very difficult time of the year for me, especially today. 39 years ago today, my older brother died in a car accident, just a freak accident. I was a senior in high school. He was a senior in college. It's been 39 years. You know, you don't forget those things. Those things stay on your mind in various ways. Sometimes it slips up on you, and you think, I'm not feeling real good today. You know, you're kind of feeling blue or down. And then I remember, oh, yeah, it's the anniversary of my brother's death, or, you know, my mother would have been 95, or, you know, something like that. Those days creep up on you. And other people don't know those things. But if we could see those things, then we would be able to extend a little grace in those moments. And so on days like today, and then with my daughter's wedding coming up, my mind is not exactly zoomed in on what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm here, I'm doing these things, but I'm not at, as you might say, 100%. And you might be sitting in your chair thinking, I have no idea what he's talking about. But you don't know the rest of the story. That's where grace comes in. And that's what Paul is trying to get across. especially in this letter to the Galatians. And yeah, Paul is not happy with them, but he's not happy with them because they've let go of one of the most essential elements of the Christian faith, and that is grace, and God's grace extended to us. And Paul's not happy about it at all, and that's why he writes the way that he writes. I don't want to keep you. I do want to point out, probably in Galatians, if you're familiar with Galatians at all, you're probably most familiar with what is called the fruit of the Spirit, and that's in. Let me get there. It's in chapter 5, verse 22, and Paul's been talking to them, and he says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance. You might think of it as patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, those are several things, but notice Paul refers to them as the fruit of the Spirit, not fruits, not plural, just fruit, because it's all one, and so all of those elements are part of what we would hope we exhibit in Christian life. The other part of that is these are elements that would make life a whole lot easier for all of us if we exhibited them or expressed them, even if we're not Christians. It would go a long way to making this place, this world, a better place to live. You know, what I often say about the Christian life is what Jesus came to do was to show us how to live life better and more fully, not to give us a set of laws that we have to follow and do, but to how to live life better. And you know, I've learned, and I don't do this well all the time, but I've learned if I can let the fruit of the Spirit show through me, then I'm a different person, and I treat people around me differently, better. And personally, I think we need a lot of that today in this world. I don't want to get on a soapbox, but we live in a world of social media of all kinds. We can say whatever we want, whenever we want to. Nobody's there to respond to us in person. It's very impersonal, but people take it very personally, and it's can be very, very hurtful. I don't know exactly where I was going with that. One, be careful what you say. The other is, don't look at everything that's said. You know, move on past it. I'm on Facebook, but I have unfollowed more people than I follow, I think, because I've just got tired of their negativity, and I don't need it. And so I don't have to follow them. I can still be friends with them, but I don't have to read what they write all the time. And so, you know, sometimes grace is being good to yourself. And so maybe you can practice grace this week during fall break by being good to yourself. That means taking the time to rest, not feeling guilty about taking a 2-hour nap, not feeling guilty about not reading the New Testament book until the next day, you know, not beating yourself up for not doing this or doing that. You know, that can be what grace looks like as well. So do y'all have any comments? All right, well, I think I want to stop there. It's early, but we'll call it a day. Have a good fall break. Don't forget your paper. Something comes up, let me know, and we'll go from here.